If you're in a lull right now, or things in your business or career aren't exactly where you want them to be, I want to share something with you, because what's happening might be the opposite of what it looks like. What I've noticed working with people for over a decade is that this kind of lull often arrives at a very particular point, right before something would have shifted. Not always, but often enough that it is worth taking seriously and understanding more fully. Because despite what you might think, or what a lot of people might think, the lull is not a sign that what you're doing isn't working. It's a sign that the nervous system has arrived at the very edge of something bigger, and it is quietly pulling you back. This matters because the lull is the place most people give up. They change direction, they decide this wasn't the right path, they stop putting in the energy they were putting in because they have quietly concluded it will not work. And for some of them, what they've just decided to walk away from was right at the edge of the thing they were building towards. You may recognize this in yourself as I'm sharing, even if you haven't named it fully before. But things are going well, there's momentum, something's building, then right before something bolder, bigger, it goes quiet, you get busy with other things, you find reasons why this is not the right time. You distract yourself, the energy that was there isn't quite there anymore, and you don't know where it went. From the inside, this can look many different ways. It can look like procrastination, self-sabotage, a new pivot, new direction, but the behavior underneath all of them is the same. Your system has met a threshold and it is now pulling you back. The label is the story laid over the top. Or it's more specific than that. There's something you keep almost doing, an opportunity that you have been thinking about for ages, an action that has been in your mind, something that's going to require more of you, that you keep it in your pocket for later. And each time you get close, you think about it more, there's a real internal, not yet. And that not yet sounds entirely reasonable, but it keeps happening. Now, before I go into what I think is underneath this, I do want to draw a distinction, because not every lull is the same lull, and the response depends on which one you're in. So here's the question worth asking yourself. Is what you're moving towards genuinely bigger and bolder than where you are now? A bigger role with more weight to it, more visibility, a version of your work that would put you in front of more people, seen by more people, judged by more people, require you to be much more visible than you currently are. Something that honestly requires more from you than you currently give. And if the answer is yes, and you experience that lull, that is a particular kind of pullback. It's the one I want to talk about. The one I've come to recognize as a threshold pattern rather than a directional problem. If the answer is no, the lull might be telling you something else entirely. Genuine misalignment, exhaustion, a direction that isn't yours. Those are real and they need different responses. I'm going to talk about the threshold version because it is the one that most often gets misread and misinterpreted. People at the edge of something bigger often conclude, I'm off course, when in fact their system has just arrived at a place it doesn't yet know how to hold and how to feel safe in. What's going on here isn't a practical problem. It isn't timing, it isn't resources, it isn't readiness in an ordinary sense. It's that your system has arrived at the edge of something bigger than it currently believes is safe. And it's doing what every good nervous system does when it meets a threshold. It's pulling you back. I call this pattern the exposure bind, one of 4 patterns I work with in the people I see day in, day out. The exposure bind is a learned response that your nervous system holds. It's beneath your thinking mind, beneath thought, and it says being bigger is dangerous, being fully seen is really unsafe. It's usually formed very, very early on before you had words for it. Maybe being noticed wasn't straightforward. Maybe praise came with conditions, or being too visible in the family wasn't easy, wasn't safe, was frowned on, or you learned at some point that making yourself smaller just kept things smoother. Whatever the specifics, a rule got written. Being seen, being bigger is a threat. Now, your body doesn't translate that into an articulate fear. It translates it into action, into the post that you don't publish, the opportunity that you turn down, the momentum that just disappears right before a bigger, bolder moment, the lull that arrives when you're right on the edge of something more. It also translates into the procrastination, the self-sabotage, the pivot. Those are the surface. The exposure bind is often underneath. The pullback is your system protecting you from a threat it learned about decades and decades ago in a context that no longer exists. Here's the part that makes this almost impossible to catch from the inside. The exposure bind doesn't announce itself. It hides inside perfectly reasonable sounding decisions. It's not the right time. I just need to get a few more things in order. I just want to make sure that I'm totally ready. You know what? I'm going to do it next year because things are going to be settled by then. Each of these can be true, and each of them can also be the bind talking. From the inside, you often can't tell which is which. The decision feels completely considered, well argued, like wisdom rather than fear. And that's the point. If it felt like fear, you'd notice it. The way you catch it is in the pattern over time. You notice that you've been almost ready for 2 years, that opportunities come and go with plausible reasons why each one isn't quite it, that people with less experience, fewer credentials than you, are doing the thing you said you wanted to do. When the lull keeps coming back at the same point in your journey, particularly the point where the next step would require more visibility, more presence than you're currently offering, it is definitely worth asking whether this is a practical problem or a threshold problem, because the fix for each is completely different. The obvious response when you clock this pattern is to push through, like force yourself past the resistance, just do the thing. This rarely works as a strategy. Pushing through doesn't address what's actually happening under the surface. The system that was pulling you back is still pulling you back. You've overridden it for one moment, and the next threshold will produce the same response, usually stronger, because the system has just been overridden rather than actually updated. Without addressing what's going on underneath, the underlying patterns often end up crashing, not at the threshold, but past it. The contraction goes underground and comes out in completely unexpected ways. Exhaustion, illness, decisions that are really self-defeating, self-limiting. The body doesn't forget what hasn't actually been resolved. The lull can actually be useful information. It's not a sign something's wrong with you or with your direction. It is your system telling you that you are at the edge of something. It doesn't yet know. It doesn't yet know how to hold it. And that is very different from a sign to stop. It is a sign to pay attention. When this pattern starts to shift, the first thing most people notice is that the avoidance gets quieter. The same opportunity that would have produced a polite internal no is now something they can actually work with, they can weigh. They might still say no. The difference is that it's a real choice, not a reflex, not the subconscious speaking for them. The next thing is that the size of what they can take on starts to expand without it feeling forced. What felt impossible a year ago starts to feel entirely possible. Not because they pushed themselves into it, but because the system has actually grown its capacity. The platform that you're seen on that would have been a no gets a yes. The visibility that would have triggered a pullback, a retreat, feels maybe not comfortable but tolerable, and then gradually something more than tolerable. The lull stops being a problem and starts being a signal that the system is at the edge of its current range and that the range can expand once the pattern underneath it has been addressed. If you're in a lull right now, what I do know is that the lull is the place most people stop, and that for a significant number of them, what they walked away from was right at the edge of the thing they've been building towards. Before you change direction, before you pivot, before you write the entire thing off, it's worth asking whether your system is just doing what nervous systems do best at a threshold. The exposure bind is one of 4 patterns I see over and over again. The others are about pace, standards, and receiving. They usually come together, and one is usually bigger or bolder or louder. The invisible ceiling quiz on my website maps which one is most active for you. Link is in the description. If what I've described matches the pattern that you're in, this is worth a few minutes of your time.